Hello, my name is Eric Sieben, and I am one of the pastors at the Village Church. The following podcast is a ministry of the Village Church. We hope that it inspires you, that it draws you closer to Jesus, and it opens your eyes to the possibilities of living in the kingdom. Enjoy, and God bless.
Let's take a deep breath and go to God in prayer. Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for the time that we have to spend together. Thank you for your word. I pray that you would bless our meditation on your story, on your love for us, on what you have for us. In your name I pray. Amen. Amen. All right. We are headed towards belonging. So every year, as Daniel said, we have this belonging service, and we come together and we do a big art project, and we sign the covenant, and we say, this is where I want to belong. And so part of that is just, it's saying, this is the space where I'm going to be in relationship. It's where I'm going to pursue the people around me. I'm going to listen to the pastors. I'm going to read what the community's reading. I'm going to be about this community. And that belonging is I belong to this community. And so when I say I belong to this community and you say you belong to this community, what I'm saying is that we belong to each other. So I'm going to care for you like you belong to me, and you're going to care for me like I belong to you. Because this is a space where we want to seek God together, be people who are as we talked about recently, encouraging one another, spurring one another on. And so every year, as we walk towards belonging, we take a little bit of time, sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little shorter, but we take some time to consider, what's our community about? What are we about? What's our church about? I don't know. What are we doing together? Why are we here? What are we doing? And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about calling and sending. The call of Jesus, that he calls us to himself, and then he sends us out to go and to do work. And so today, we're going to talk about seeing and knowing. That as we follow Jesus, we're going to explore in the story that Jesus sees people, he knows them. And if we're people who are patterning our lives after him, if we're being disciples of Jesus, then we need to learn to see and know people as Jesus did. And the statement I'd like to make right off the bat is that to see someone is an invitation to know them. Right? In our vernacular today, when you sit with someone and you say, I see you. I see you. What you're saying is not literally, I see your physical person right here in front of you. You say, I see, I know you. I know your story. I know what you're going through, or I hear what you're saying. Like there's a knowing in that language. And so to see someone is an invitation to know them. So we're going to jump into Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3 begins with one of my favorite stories. It's one of my favorite stories. I've preached on it before. We're going to revisit a couple things from a previous sermon, one thing in particular, but I'm going to read it first. Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill? But they remained silent. And he looked around at them in anger, and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Because, of course, they did. This story is one of my favorite stories because in it, we get this taste of Jesus that sometimes when we think about Jesus, when we read the story, when we go to prayer or something, we have this picture of Jesus sort of as this ethereal sort of spiritual being or this elevated spiritual leader, and he's kind of above it all and going through life and in some sense not really human. And yet there's these stories in the Bible that root his humanity, where he looks around and he sees people. He sees them and he responds, and there's an expression of emotion in it. And this is one of those stories, and I just want to dig into it and look at what is it. Grab onto to the man Jesus, the human, the God in this world, come into his creation, living, seeing people. We begin with the synagogue. Jesus is in the synagogue. So the synagogue is a place of gathering. It's a place where the Jews would come together to read scriptures, to read the Torah, the law, to read the prophets, to sing psalms together. It's a place where you would sit and you would listen to people teach on particular passages. It's not a place where you would do your sacrifices. So your sacrifices would happen in the temple. So you had to go to the temple to do your sacrifices, but you're not just going to go off to Jerusalem every time you want to gather. So you'd have these synagogues where people would gather and learn and read and sing together. And it's the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is the seventh day, right? So for 6 days God created, and the seventh day he rested. And so in his law, in the Ten Commandments, in Exodus 20, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. On the Sabbath you shall not do any work." So God cares for us. And in the law, there's this relationship built with God that God he institutes rest for his people. He wants them to rest. But something happens with laws where there might be like a really simple law. So if you think about like constitutional law, right? The Constitution is not a long document. But there's like a 5-sentence article, right? A 5-word article, and we've got like paper after paper after paper after paper written for hundreds of years now to explain this one little article. And in the Ten Commandments in the law, you've got this one sentence that says, "You shall not do any work on the Sabbath." And they had built up over the years, there's rabbinical teachings and there's rules built up about, well, what does it mean to do work? What does it mean to work? And so they've developed this system of rules to say, well, this rule says how far you can walk on the Sabbath. And this rule says whether or not you can feed your animals on the Sabbath. And if your donkey falls in a pit, can you save your donkey? And importantly for us, if you are a doctor and your work is healing, can you work on the Sabbath? Can you heal people on the Sabbath? And they had built up all of these rules. And in many ways, the Pharisees had this very narrow, rigid view of these rules. Because the Pharisees believed that if everyone followed the law for one day, that God would return. And so they had this, they had figured it out. They had made it as rigid as possible so that everyone would follow. If you just did this for one day, if everyone did this for one day, then God's going to return. And so they lived out these rules to the letter of these self-imposed rules. And so they're looking out at Jesus. Here are the Pharisees and the teachers of the law sitting in the synagogue, and there's a man with a shriveled hand. What do the Pharisees see? What did the Pharisees see? They see Jesus, this man who's gathering disciples, and they're disciples who aren't like the traditional rabbinical disciples. They're fishermen. They're from different sects of like understanding of the law, and they're political like opponents. He's gathering all these disciples, and people are following him, and they're listening to him. And when he teaches in the synagogue, he teaches things that sound weird, that are different from the way they understood it. And there's a tinge in Jesus's teaching of politics, of things that would enrage like the local king, let alone the Roman emperor. And so they're looking at Jesus as this man who's this troublemaker. They see him, and this moment is a chance to discredit him. Because if they can figure something out, if they can prove that he's breaking the law, then they can say, don't follow Jesus. He's breaking the law. He's not a good rabbi. You shouldn't follow him. The Pharisees also see the man with the shriveled hand. And I've read this so many times. I just wonder sometimes, is this man a plant? Like, did they go out and find this guy and say, hey, we'll give you 2 pieces of silver to just come to the synagogue today? Because in some sense, they knew Jesus. They knew what Jesus was doing, right? I don't know. There's no way to prove that. But they do look at the man, and they don't see this man created by God in pain. That's not what they see. They see a tool. They see a way to trap Jesus. It's not about this man with the shriveled hand. It's about trapping Jesus. So what did Jesus see? Jesus sees the Pharisees. He sees their scheming and their plotting. He sees them trying to trap him. And so he steps right into it. And he calls the man up in front. He says, come here, stand up in front of everybody. And he just confronts it straight on. And he asks the man a question, a very simple question. I've done this before. And I'm just going to ask all of you the same question that Jesus asked the Pharisees, and see if all of you can come up with an answer. Don't remain silent. Don't be like the Pharisees and remain silent. Answer the question, okay? Which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? Good job, everybody. To save a life or to kill? Yeah. It's this simple question. It's a very simple question. To do good or to do evil? To save a life or to kill? It's a very simple question that takes all of these rules, that takes all of these things around the Sabbath and flips it over and reveals the heart of God. It takes it back to just what is God about? What is God's heart about? God's heart in the Sabbath is to give people rest. If you look at it, one of my favorite passages in Isaiah 58, he says that he's talking about fasting. He says that God's heart is about to loose the chains of injustice, to set the oppressed free, to share food with the hungry, and provide shelter for the poor wanderer. This is what God is about. He takes these rules and he strips it away and just reveals the heart of God. That there's this, what is God about? He's about doing good. He's about salvation, not death. What does he see in this man? This man with the shriveled hand. He sees a man in pain. A man who needs healing. A man who can't work, can't provide for himself, let alone a family. He sees in him the image of God. He sees in him the image of God. And what does Jesus do? This is my favorite part. It says, he looked at them. he looked at them. He looked around. Can you just imagine for a moment Jesus standing there looking around at the crowd? He looked at them in anger. They didn't answer the question. This simple question, they couldn't answer it. It says he looked at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he brings him healing. Jesus sees them. He knows them. And if we are to be people who are following Jesus, if we are to be people who are disciples, who are patterning our lives after Jesus, then we need to be people who are seeing and knowing as he did. So what does it mean to see and know? To see and know. First, to see people, you need to notice them. You just need to simply notice them. Everyone in the crowd noticed the man with the shriveled hand. To notice. And then to be curious about the people around you. To be curious about what you've noticed. To know someone, you need to ask them questions. You need to ask good questions. Questions that go beyond the surface and take some depth. If you're going to ask good questions, then you need to listen. You need to listen to the response. You need to listen to what people say. So here at the Village, we practice this. We practice seeing and knowing every Sunday when we come together. So practicing at the Village, practicing seeing and knowing at the Village. Here's how you can step into practicing, okay? This is where it happens. First of all, 10/5 to 10:10, 5:10. That 5 o'clock to 5:10, on the website it says that we start our service at 5 o'clock. But we don't do our call to worship until 5:10. And that's on purpose. It's not because we live in Village Standard Time. It's not because we just have ADD and we forget what time it is, though some of us do and some of us do forget what time it is. And it gets to be 5:12 and you look up and you go, "Oh no, we need to start." No, it's on purpose. Eric, several years ago, we were doing a sermon in liturgy, and he called this the Holy Kiss Time. You can go back and listen to that sermon to get the context for that. But it's this time of greeting, of seeing one another, of noticing each other. And so when you come to church, get here at 5 and then notice as people come in. Notice them. So when people walk in and they've got their head down and they've got their shoulders hunched and they've got a scowl on their face, notice them and be curious. Man, that person looks upset, right? If they've got, they notice that they cut their hair, right? Do they have a bounce in their step? Are they, super happy? Is it a harried mother chasing their kids, running into the sanctuary? Like, notice people. Be curious about them. We practice seeing and knowing people at the Village through creativity, through artwork and cooking. So we have all this artwork up, right? And every now and then new pieces pop up, and it's stuff that we've painted, that we've drawn, that people have done over the years. And so notice it. Take time to notice the artwork. When we do our songs, notice the person who wrote it. We just sang a song that Eric wrote out of Hebrews 10, 24, and 25. This song, Gather, and it says, written by Eric. And then there's like artwork behind it, and it often says artwork by or photographed by, and it'll say who it's by. Notice it. Be curious about it. Be curious about the artwork. In a little bit, Corey's going to come up, and he's going to tell us what we're eating. And we get to see him and notice his offering to us of food, of dinner. Notice our creativity. Notice people in celebrating. So every week we offer a space where we say, if you bring us dessert to remind us that you have something to celebrate, then we will celebrate it. Most often that's a birthday. Sometimes it's an anniversary. Sometimes it's no kidney stones for the last year. Yeah. Right? But we celebrate. See the people who are celebrating. Notice them. Be curious about them. The other space we celebrate is the healing chair, which is right over there, the white chair. And at the end of my sermon, I'm going to say there's 3 ways to respond. And one of those ways is to sit in the healing chair. I'm going to say, if you're weighed down by the brokenness in this world, if you need prayer, if you're sick, go and sit in the healing chair, and someone will notice you. They will see you, and they will come and pray for you. So be attentive. Notice the people who are sitting in the healing chair, and go and pray for them. And this all begins here, and then it goes out from here. And we're called to notice people and to be curious and to ask good questions and to listen to each other when we eat together. When you go home and you're sitting with your family, or you have a friend over, or you go get coffee with someone, notice them. Be aware of them. Be curious. Ask good questions. We practice asking good questions in particular in our pilgrim groups. When we walk through the table of decision, one of the best things about it is learning to ask good questions and learning to listen to someone as they share their story. It begins here on Sunday and goes out from here. So practice. There's another side of this, though. Matthew chapter 9. This is the calling of Matthew, the disciple Matthew. And I want you to think about it. To just notice as we read, who sees what. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he said to him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." So here's the calling of Matthew. He's going along and he sees Matthew at the tax collector's booth. He says, "Come follow me." So what does Jesus see? Begin with Jesus this time. What does Jesus see? Jesus sees Matthew. He sees a man who would follow him. He calls him, and he knows Matthew. He knows that Matthew will follow him. And it's not just that Matthew's going to follow him, it's that Matthew's going to be one of his disciples, one of the 12, one of his closest friends. Matthew is going to be a part of the first church in Jerusalem, the gathering of people who prayed after Jesus was resurrected. There's Matthew. Matthew is close to Jesus. He sees him. He sees the image of God in him. He sees what he can make him into and calls him to himself. He calls Matthew. He also sees a man who's going to be excited about it. And so Matthew throws a big party. It says in Matthew that while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, but if you read the same story in Luke, it says after this, he threw a great banquet and invited all his friends. All the friends of Matthew come over to have a party. Who are Matthew's friends? Tax collectors. These are the people who are there, and Jesus sees friends. And he sees people who need him. He sees sinners who need him. He sees the value in them, in these tax collectors. So we have to pause for a moment. And as we consider what do the Pharisees see, we have to think about tax collectors. Because tax collectors are on the outside of relationship, on the outside of community. Because tax collectors is not like a Jewish thing. It is a Roman thing. The Romans taxed the Jews. And so someone had to go and collect those taxes. And so here are these people, they're Jewish, but they're taking money from their own people and giving it to the Romans. Now it's tax, and if they don't give it, the Romans are going to come down, and they're gonna find out from the Romans what that's all about. But the problem with the tax collectors is the reason they take the job is not to take the money and give it to the Romans. It's to take the money and then to take a little more money for themselves. Because the attractive piece of the job is you have to collect 8 gold coins, and so you collect 10 gold coins, and you give the 8 gold coins to the Romans, and you keep the 2. So the tax collectors are sitting there stealing from their own people. And they're outside of relationship. And so they're outside of the law. They're sinners. So what do the Pharisees see? They see tax collectors who are betraying their people. They see people who are not worth being in relationship with. They see sinners who are outside the law, who shouldn't be sharing the same table with the rabbi. Where Jesus sees value and worth in the image of God, the Pharisees see just sinners who aren't worth relationship. And there's another piece to this, which is that the Pharisees ask this question, why does the teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And there's one other thing that Jesus sees. He sees the Pharisees. He sees them, and he says it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And now, in other places, Jesus calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs and you brood of vipers. So I don't think when we read this that Jesus is saying that the Pharisees are healthy and righteous, right? He's not just saying, well, you guys are healthy and righteous, and these guys are sinners, and so they really need me. You guys are fine. Don't worry about it. No. He's saying they're sick, and they know they're sick. They know they need a doctor. If you don't know you're sick, unless it happens by chance, you're not going to go to the doctor. And that righteousness is this self-righteousness. It's a standing up and saying, I don't need you. I've got it figured out. I've followed all the rules. I know what I'm about. And the question we have to ask is, when we come into community, we can do all of the seeing and the knowing. And I was talking to Sue about this. She said, well, that's fine. If you want, to see someone as an invitation to know them, yeah, okay, but what if the person doesn't want to be seen? When you come into community, are you willing to be seen and known? Because it's not just to see and know the other person, but it's to be seen and be known. Are you coming to church knowing that you are sick and need Jesus? Knowing the brokenness in this life, or knowing just that you're weighed down and you need Jesus? Or are you just sitting there thinking you're healthy and you're fine and you're standing apart? So those people need to figure it out. They need to figure out, they need Jesus. They need to figure it out. I've got it figured out. When you come into community, are you willing to be seen and known? It's a bit of my story. In 2010, I moved to Texas to be an assistant pastor at a church in Houston. And it went really poorly. And in 2011, I moved out of Texas back to Arizona. And in 2012, right at the beginning of the year, I started coming to the village. And I would sit down, I'd go over for dinner at Eric and Sue's house and at the Seneca house, and I'd have dinner, and then I'd sit down with Eric, and he'd say, well, tell me about Texas. How was it? And I'd say, oh, it was great. He'd say, well, tell me a story. And I'd say, oh, yeah, we got accused of stealing from the church. And Eric go, oh, okay. Tell me another story. And I'd say, oh, yeah, I was running youth group and this lady went to the board because she was mad that I wasn't doing it in Spanish, that I was talking to the high schoolers in English. Oh, well, that doesn't sound great. And he reflected to me. He was curious about me. So he noticed my story. He was curious about it. And then he asked me a question, a good question. He said, hey, every time you talk about Texas, every time I ask you how it went, you say it was great. And then I ask you to tell me a story, and it sounds terrible. So what's up with that? Why is that? And he pursued me in it. And one of the things that I had to figure out is how to actually be vulnerable about how I felt. And to acknowledge that, yeah, actually, this experience, while God used it, and God worked through it, and there were some good things that came out of it, especially in my call, and a lot of that had to be worked through. And I had to acknowledge that things weren't okay. I had to be willing to be seen and known in that space, because Eric could have said, like, hey, it sounds like it was terrible, and I could have said, no, it was great, and just moved right along. But being in community, I experienced transformation because I was seen and known. And then, by God's grace, I was willing to be seen and known and got to experience that. So, a couple ways to practice this. 2 ways to practice, and I made them rhyme, sort of on purpose, mostly on accident. First way to practice, pray on your way. Pray on your way. Okay? When you're going somewhere, you're coming to church, when you go to someone's house, when you go to pilgrim group, when you're going to work, when you go to the coffee shop, I don't know if I said that already. You're going somewhere. Go there intentionally. Pray on your way. As you're going, pray for your own heart. Pray for the person you're going to meet with or see, or like pray as you go. Pray on your way. The second thing, look around before you sit down. Look around before you sit down. So when you get somewhere, look around. Take a moment. Pause. Don't just go to your seat and say, this is where I go. But look around and notice. Take a moment to notice things. What do you notice? And be curious about it. And you don't always have to do something about it. But when you notice something, when you see someone, it's an invitation to know them. And so if you walk into someone's house and it's a mess, notice it. Be curious about it. You don't have to walk in and say, hey, why is your house a mess? But you can notice it. And it's an opportunity to be in relationship with the person, to notice them, to be curious about them. And if you have a good relationship with them, maybe don't ask, hey, why is your house a mess? But there's good questions you can ask and pursue a relationship with the other person, to know them, to listen to them. Pray on your way and look around before you sit down. Just notice. Be curious. Before we close, I want to go to Isaiah chapter 40. This week when we were praying on Tuesday, we were listening together to God, and Eric brought up Isaiah 40 and said, hey, Mark, I think you need to be meditating on Isaiah 40 for this season. So I said, great, I love Isaiah 40. So Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 5 say, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This passage is about Jesus. That in Jesus, the glory of the Lord has been revealed, and we have seen it. All people will see it together. And this is important because Jesus, in all of the things that we do, Jesus is the focal point. If we are not seeking the glory of God, if we're not seeing the glory of God, then all of our striving, right? You can do all the things that I said. You can notice people and be curious about them and ask good questions and listen to them. You know, you can go out and you can get like a degree from the best university in the world in psychology and have all these, like, you can listen, be the best listener. You can pray on your way and you can look around before you sit down. You can do all these things, but if you do not seek Jesus first, all of your striving is for nothing. If you are not seeking Jesus first. What's Matthew looking at? What does Matthew see? Matthew sees Jesus. So, pray on your way. Look around before you sit down. And seek first the glory of the Lord revealed in Jesus. Amen? Amen. All right. I have a couple minutes, but guys, it's hot. And we can talk about it over the meal. I do have a couple minutes if you have a response. Not to say don't talk, but I'm just saying it's hot. And you can talk. I'm just saying it's real hot. Don't be long-winded, yeah. Yeah, Karen.
Okay. Maybe you talked about this when I was out there for a while, but what would the cultural understanding of the word sinners have been?
People who are outside the law.
So would these people not be going to the synagogue because they're kind of like outcasts?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they were so visibly different from the Jewish community that they weren't part of the synagogue.
Yeah.
Okay. Like the rabbis would be like, and then they'll come here.
Yeah, they're not
Okay.
not following the law. They're not here.
They're not
they're
even
outside. We're pushing
they're
them
not
out because
even
they're
pushed out. Okay, thank you. So like our way of thinking about that word would be thinking about people that might be pushed out of religious communities because of their lifestyle or behavior choices or whatever, right? Is that fair? Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm curious who you think today's tax collectors are. Who should we, as Christ in the world, be seeking out to spend time with?
The person you really don't want to spend time with. No, I mean there is that sense of like I don't want to be with that person because maybe they've got a certain way. Maybe they don't like the things that I like. Maybe whatever it is. But pursuing people who, and I think it goes back to some of what we talked about last week in the morning, which is like to be friends with people. To choose to be friends with people is not to say, hey, we've got everything in common. But it's taking people who actually you don't have a lot in common with. I mean, that's part of like the value of belonging and being together here is we don't have everything in common. We don't understand everything the same way. But we're going to be friends with each other. We're going to pursue each other. We're going to seek to care for one another in Jesus because it's what we're called to. Eric's got his hand up.
I was just thinking that we live in a culture, to answer your question, Peter, that is very, like, we otherize everyone, and we have done that even more. So we use our views and our beliefs and our understanding of things to exclude other people and to make them an object. And that's what was happening there. And there's I liked your answer. Whoever you don't want to hang out with, I think I otherize so many people inside my community and outside that it's very convicting to think through, like, okay, who am I doing this to? Because when you ask the question, am I willing to be seen and known in community? That's an easy question to kind of pass on by. But the answer I would give honestly is, well, by some people, I am willing to be seen and known.
Yeah.
I think the person that we're called to is the person we don't want to be seen and known by, and to be vulnerable to them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. What'd you say? That's terrifying? Yeah. Thank you all. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for the opportunity to be together to consider your word. I pray that you would guard the things that have been spoken, that you would open our hearts to hear you speaking, to know you better. Would you give us courage to step into following you? Courage to be vulnerable, courage to ask hard questions. Bless this time of worship. In your name I pray. Amen.